Hello everybody, and welcome to another fun and funky detailed diatribe. I am today's host, Red. I am, as always, joined by my co-host, Blue.
I walk into the room, what do I see?
It's a 10 foot by 10 foot square room, and there's an orc guarding a chest. What do you do? I should have brought my dice. Oh man, this is one of those subjects that I put on my list of like possible detailed diatribes to do like months ago when I was looking at some of these stories that, as described, were told with D&D, stories about D&D, stories told in the universe of D&D, stories based on games of D&D, and then I just kind of let it sit, and then a bunch of other stuff happened. And then I am currently in the unenviable position of being between two trips with like 2.5 weeks between them. And in that time, I have to make a video from scratch. And while I was like contemplating what do I do, what do I already have a strongly formulated opinion about, I was like, hey, wait a second.
Actually, give yourself some credit. You're between 2 out of 3 trips, 2 for business and 1 for fun, so
That's
it's
true.
even more than you said.
Yes, well, I was already between 2 trips last month, and now I'm between 2 trips again. And after this, I also have to do Journey to the West. But first, today I want to walk through a brief history of some of the, as mentioned, stories that have been told with and about D&D. And hopefully you'll join me for this. Blue, your perspective on D&D is rather different than mine, so I'm actually very excited for the conversation we're going to get out of this.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. I'm going to lose a lot of my street cred.
No. Listen, the fact that D&D is street cred now is a fucking wild swerve from back in the day.
Yes. Yes.
I've mentioned I'm a second generation nerd. Both my parents were big into all of the old staples, and were playing AD&D, I think back when it was OD&D, and invited me to my first game of it when I was 9 years old, and 3.5 was new and exciting. So my perspective on this is a little bit different.
You rolled a 1 and got your whole family TPK'd.
Oh man, we did blow up the entire world at the end of episode 1, and then had to spend the rest of the campaign stitching it back together. That was pretty fun. But yes, so to start off, we should do a quick little crash course. What are we talking about? Because not everybody is like me. Not everyone is even like you. Not everyone is any sort of nerd. So for the context, the vital information you must know before we get into what we are going to be talking about for the rest of this presentation. Dungeons & Dragons is a tabletop RPG. First came out in 1974. It's gone through several editions and iterations in the intervening 5 decades and 1 extra year to grow on. Core gameplay loop: players control player characters, PCs of various different classes, and they adventure through a world where the main decisions are made by the game master, who also controls the NPCs. Any character that is not a PC is under the control of the game master, basically. The players describe the choices and actions that their individual character tries to take, and the GM will either give them a ruling or say, the outcome is uncertain, roll a die about it. The setting of D&D is traditionally high fantasy, although several different high fantasy worlds have been used as modules and campaign settings for D&D, which will actually be relevant later. But the primary thing is that our heroes will adventure through perilous environments, e.g. dungeons, and battle monsters, e.g. dragons. It's pretty simple.
Oh,
Now I
Could you imagine if I figured that out right here?
Whoa!
That's what the and is for.
Yeah, whoa!
Finally, it makes sense.
That and is covering a multitude of sins. And there's advancement. Characters are expected to grow gradually more powerful as they progress through the game. And the main way this happens is through level advancement. Characters will gain XP, or experience points, by overcoming challenges, and when they hit a certain threshold, they go up to the next level and gain some swanky new abilities and hit points. They get harder to hit, they get harder to take down, they get more fun stuff to do in combat. Anyway, this is all like muscle memory to me, but I do know that there are many people still in this world who have never played even a single game of D&D, so I thought it was important to cover our bases. Now, the funny thing about this is that this does not necessarily sound like it would lend itself the best to certain forms of storytelling, because mechanically, D&D is almost entirely a combat simulator. It has mechanics for things out of combat, but they essentially boil down to, do you have a pertinent skill that might make you better at this non-combat thing you're trying to do? And if so, you get to add a number to the die you roll to decide whether or not you get to do that thing. All of the crunch is stored in the combat mechanics. But despite this, as the PCs adventure through the world and face challenges, a story arises whether or not it was intended to do so in the first place. Also the dice. Also those little bastards.
Also the dice. This has led famous internet funny man and second most famous person in Dungeons & Dragons, Brennan Lee Mulligan, to declare that D&D is gambling with stories because you are using the mechanics mechanical engine of dice, which is gambling,
Yes.
for not chips or money, but for stories.
Yeah.
And that is an interesting way to conceive of it.
No, absolutely. Essentially, do you get to have this next plot beat play out the way you want it to? Which sounds like it would only hinder storytelling, and in practice, that is not actually how it always works. But the primary thing is that when the result of a situation is uncertain, you go to the dice for a determination. And the dice do not care what is or is not narratively satisfying. The dice could not give less of a shit about what you want to happen, how cool you wish your character was, how much it would make sense for this to be the big moment where you get the win. The dice will do what the dice will do. And this affects all of the stories that come out of a medium like D&D, where the element of randomness, the gambling component, is baked in all the way down. And on that note, same internet second most famous D&D person online, Brendan Lee Mulligan, has brought up that if you are trying to tell the story of Lord of the Rings, and then Samwise does his big, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you, and then he fails his strength check and does not successfully pick up Frodo, it's like, no, just let him do that. Don't make him roll if you can't handle the failure condition. That's like a truism that GMs are being taught these days. But the thing is, while this can undercut a dramatic moment, it can also be very funny. It is kind of a truism that some of the most fun and memorable things that happen in home games are when the dice make you absolutely work for it. The epic highs and lows of collaborative improv storytelling with gambling. It's a uniquely D&D experience, and sort of having to navigate around that random factor is a lot of what gives D&D that sort of unique flavoring. And D&D played at a table can be a lot more fun during the failures than during the successes, where things are playing out the way it would, you know, in Lord of the Rings. But a key thing to be aware of is that something that's fun at a table with your friends is not necessarily something that will be funny when you tell someone about it later. The art of turning an experience into a fun, interesting, or funny story is a complicated one that requires a lot of practice, and something that was really awesome when it was 3 a.m. and you'd been at it for 15 hours and this was a bad guy who you were really personally invested in and you got the killing blow, like, that's awesome. It's so cool that that happened. Hard to turn that into a story where anyone else will feel the same way you did at the time.
I do specifically remember somewhere in like late 2019s or early 2020s, we were on a stream with Joe Cat. It might have even been one of our streams, and I was like explaining some funny stories from our home game to him, and I realized immediately afterwards, like, oh, none of that made sense.
Ooh.
It actually sounded very boring, and it truly is not the same if you were not there at the table.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem that has tantalized gamers for the last 50 plus years of like, how do you take this moment that was so impactful and awesome for you and communicate it to anyone else in a way that gets this point across? And given that we are a channel that summarizes things, this is also a problem we've wrangled with in other contexts. So we actually have a lot of experience with like the specific difficulties of how do you take the moment that absolutely knocked your socks off and then use it to knock someone else's socks off. Because if you can't just convince them to watch the entire show and get that socks knocking off moment, you know, organically, you gotta find the way to speed run it. And of course, there's no option in a home D&D game of having someone ride along and like just watch so they get the big moment when like you do the cool one-liner and then roll the really good roll or whatever. So anyway, this has been a problem that has tantalized people for quite a long time, and it has led to several attempts to take D&D as a game, as a story setting, as a system, and turn it into stories, scripted stories that are not interactive, but potentially still have the same impact, which does, of course, lead to the question, what is it about D&D that is recognizably D&D-esque, so that you can make sure that it works its way into those stories that you're telling?
It takes 4 goddamn ever.
It does. D&D takes a while. That's a big problem, and why it's so hard to explain what's so fucking fun about it is like, yeah, and then we were like 16 hours deep, and we've been fighting Strahd for like 4 of those hours, and canonically in game, 18 whole seconds had passed, and it's like, okay, when's the cool part? It's like, you're right, so then I rolled real good and I punched him, and it's like, oh my god, that's fucking crazy.
And then I walked 15 feet to the left, and mechanically there are 9 reasons why this was a strategic coup d'etat against that fucker Strahd.
Oh, you know it, baby. So, breaking down what I think is the recognizable rhythm of D&D into some, like, we're not doing any clever, like, Captain-style acronyms in this one. I just thought it was useful to sort of break it down so we know what we're working with. Structurally, the story format of D&D is very granular. You get small, self-contained combat encounters that are chained together along a journey from point A to point B. Whether that is overland quick travel, Lord of the Rings style, you know, start in the Shire, get to Mordor. But also you get ones that are like start at the beginning of the dungeon and get to the end of the dungeon. It's just, for the most part, it happens on linear journeys, and it will sort of be broken up at regular intervals by fights. Heroes will be able to take rests in between to recover some of their strength so they're not just running a fucking gauntlet, although that does actually also happen and it can be fun. And it's all building up to some kind of perilous ultimate confrontation, usually with some kind of either really big boss monster or like really personally significant boss monster. Almost all of these conflicts are fights to the death against some number of acceptable targets for murder, like goblins and like kobolds, and just some kind of fantasy thing you can kill and not feel even slightly bad about it. These are very common in this setting.
Or your players are madmen.
Yes, or they're just murder hobos and they will kill anything that moves. That is also a thing. And if things have been too quiet for too long, you just roll up a random encounter and throw that at them and see what happens. Specialization comes in the side of the main characters. Anything that isn't a fight is usually expected to be handled by the one character who's built to be good at that one thing. So it's like, oh, we need to negotiate with this person. Let's bring out the person who's good at negotiations. We need to sneak around. Let's put the sneaky person on duty. You know, that kind of thing. So generally, these events might be less of a team effort and a little bit more like peel off one character for sort of a solo mission while everyone else hangs back and does like anime commentary on how good they are at this thing they're doing.
It's a little bit of a lock and key scenario where the party operates as one kind of entity, and you get to the point in the dungeon or the adventure or, you know, working through the town to figure out where to go next, where you have a problem that is presented by the game master to the players because the GM knows they have the tools to solve this somewhere within their party, and sometimes it is obvious what you need to do to crack open that particular lock, and sometimes it's like, oh, we need to delve into our spells or our equipment and see if, oh, maybe we can think of something new and novel to approach this. But I feel like it's a kind of like a stratum of, from the very obvious, like, okay, you have the lockpick guy. This is the moment where they get to use the fact that they can lockpick to more complicated stuff of, okay, we need to kind of figure out how on earth we even can do this, depending on, I guess, how puzzly it is.
Yes, actually, this is pertinent to an entry a couple paragraphs down, shenanigans, because it's very common in a game of D&D for the DM to pose some sort of challenge that in the DM's mind is like a lock and key. It's like, okay, they're gonna need to use like this specific item or like solve this specific puzzle. And PCs are really good at finding ways to completely circumvent those or solve them in a wildly unexpected way. And this is kind of like a uniquely D&D-esque little moment because it's fairly common in a just written story for a lock and key scenario to play out exactly like you said, where like a character's like, wait, could it be the amulet we picked up 3 dungeons back? Looks like it would fit perfectly into this groove in the wall or whatever. Whereas in actuality, your players are probably gonna be like, I got some silly putty in my back pocket. I think I could probably like make it into like roughly the shape, or like, how about we just go out the window and like climb around the roofs for a while or something like that. So that specific moment of like, I understand what the plot wants me to do, but I think I'm gonna do this other thing instead. That's a very D&D-esque thing. And when it shows up in a written story, you can have that little moment of like, oh, that's surprisingly D&D of them. How interesting, how novel. But yeah, also party balance-wise, the specializations aside, all our main characters are generally expected to be roughly equivalently powerful or experienced. So you generally do not have the sort of like power curve disparity you get in an average superhero team, where it might be like one person is sort of hard carrying the physical strength angle and everyone else is a little bit more weird about it. In a D&D party, the expectation is that everyone can at least a little bit pull their weight, although, you know, a dedicated martial class is probably going to be doing a little bit more heavy lifting in combat, a dedicated spellcaster probably has a little bit more battlefield control than anyone else, but they're still all supposed to be roughly the same level. And if they bring in a character who is notably way more powerful than any of the main characters, they will probably only be there for a little while and then they are going to leave to avoid unbalancing things. On that note, the development, the level advancement we talked about earlier, the heroes are expected to get stronger over time, both internally and by getting like cool new toys to play with, which they usually either get off of dead bad guys or are given by quest givers. So again, this is not like the only way that a fantasy story can lay out. There are a lot of stories where some characters do get a little bit more badass over time, but there are also stories where the characters are just kind of like stumbling haplessly through their environs doing their best. Like, again, Lord of the Rings is a touch point we keep bringing up. Frodo does not go up any levels over the course of Lord of the Rings. He only has bad things happen to him. He never gets more badass. He doesn't even get like cool new toys to play with. If anything, he loses his cool toys.
He just keeps taking levels of exhaustion. He gets the mithril shirt.
Yeah.
And then I guess that's kind of it.
I think he even loses the mithril shirt when they're in Mordor. Or, yeah, because it gets chucked by the mouth of Sauron at Aragorn and co. to be like, we definitely killed your friend. He's for sure dead.
I mean, he has it for like a movie.
He has it for a while,
book.
but he doesn't get to keep it forever. But meanwhile, Merry and Pippin are absolutely going up levels. They're chugging Ent Draft and getting stronger and taller.
I was gonna say, that's a weird way to say getting high. Yeah, we're going up levels, man.
No, they actually get so badass by the end. It's ridiculous. And like, Sam's going up levels, but also like, Aragorn is about the same level of badass all the way through. Legolas and Gimli are about the same level of badass all the way through. So like, Lord of the Rings is not a D&D story, not even close. D&D wishes it was Lord of the Rings so obviously. But one of the tells of D&D is that the whole party will sort of be figuring things out and getting stronger and better at roughly a commensurate pace to one another. And we already discussed shenanigans, and of course also the dice, those little bastards. Sometimes things will just happen that neither the plot nor the characters seem to want to happen, and everyone just kind of has to deal with those things for a little while. It's a very D&D quintessential experience, and it's completely unnecessary to include in a story, but if you do want to make a story that kind of captures the vibe of D&D, those moments are a little bit crucial, because that is probably the most quintessential D&D thing that can happen, where like the DM was not actually prepared for you to roll that badly, and now you're all kind of in the same boat.
Everyone has to make the little dexterity check to jump over that tiny gap in the mines, and Gandalf just fucking beefs it, and DM's like, he knows all of the lore. I can't just go without him. Okay, Gandalf the White. Fuck it, he's back at the start of the next book.
Not even about, but when they retell it, they have to add the Balrog to make it so that Gandalf's death is more, like, impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, a quick disclaimer before we get into the entire rest of the slideshow. This is not going to be a list of all stories about D&D that have ever been made. I'm not about that. I already took, like, 3 days running to do this. I have other things going on. Also, my first exposure to D&D was edition 3.5 back in, like, 2005. I've not played every edition and module that is being referenced. I've had to look up older rule sets, and I don't necessarily know how to parse them as accurately as I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
I'm literally just a little guy, you guys. I'm just a little guy, and it's about as far from my birthday as it actually can be. But still, have mercy. I'm just a little guy.
Can you persuade me that it's your birthday?
Yeah, I really should have brought my dice for this. I didn't even bring my tiny set of tiny dice that I can't even read.
The front of the slide with, what is that? Is that the monster manual or is that the DM's?
This is the 3.5 Player's Handbook.
It's the Player's, okay, it was the third one.
Yes.
Because I had the 3.5 books, the Monster Manual, the DM's Guide, and the Player's Handbook.
Yes, good.
And I loved the way that those 3.5 books were like these big, giant tomes printed on the front.
Oh, you're speaking my
language. It's an era of design. This is a different detail that I had tried. Flat minimalist design.
Yeah.
The modern D&D books, that's just a picture of a dragon. Like, get out of here. You're not even trying. The way these books felt. When I first played D&D, was young and dumb and did not have the attention span to read that much. I just liked cracking open all the pictures of dragons. I basically exclusively flipped through this book to see what stuff looked like and just kind of coasted on the vibes, because my first experience playing D&D was as a player on the van rides to and from school.
Oh, wow.
One of my friends in a higher grade was basically running like theater of the mind D&D because we were on a van for 45 minutes.
That's fucking
We
tight.
weren't rolling any actual dice. It was nothing like that at all. So all of my earliest experience with D&D was exclusively theater of the mind, kind of in the vein of 3.5, because that was what was happening then, but we weren't doing anything even remotely crunchy. Like if a dice roll happened at all, it was like insanity because it was so hard to do it on the van. And that was frankly the most fun I ever had with D&D because when I started adding in any mechanics, I liked it a whole lot less.
Yeah, no, that's really fun. But I'm right there with you on the 3.5 book design absolutely peaked. I fucking loved these things. Every time they made a new like expanded whatever handbook or like the complete subclass something, I would be like, yes, I need more flat prints of 3D gemstones. Oh man, yeah, and I would flip through every monster manual and just look at the pictures.
It's such a great example of how presentation does so much.
Oh yeah.
Like the front of the book was like 50% of the vibe.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And actually the player's handbook is like mostly character creation walkthrough by volume. I know this because I walked a couple of our friends through building 3.5 characters the other week for a home game I might be running at some point, or like at least a one shot. And it took 2 hours where I was like, this is going really breezily. And they were like, 5e takes 20 minutes. We can't use D&D Beyond for this. We have to do all this by hand on paper. I was like, yeah, isn't it great? Can't you feel the crunch?
Everyone's so coddled with their computers and their D&D Beyond.
Back in my day.
And their character sheets that fit on 3 double-sided pages.
Yeah, 4d6 dropped the lowest. Back in my day, it was 3d6 3d6 flat, and if you got an 8, you liked it.
The DM threw the dice at you and you picked it up off the ground.
Yeah, but yeah, no, it was fun and interesting. And one of the things that I'd forgotten, but like it all came rushing back when I cracked open the book, is like they have all these sort of like sketches, like when you're picking your characters like race and class, they're like, here's a height chart of all of like a halfling and a half-orc and a half-elf and an elf and a human. Here's like just a drawing of like a human, a half-elf, and an elf like head next to each other so you can see the difference. And I was like, this is really fucking cool. I don't have the patience to make them, but I love encyclopedias of fictional things, and D&D 3.5 fed me.
Yeah.
As previously mentioned in this very slide, I'm literally just a little guy, and 3.5 was my like intro to this, and it definitely holds an undeservedly special place in my heart. With all of that said, let's go all the way back, before the halcyon days of the early 2000s. Only 4 years after the first edition of D&D came out, the novel Quag Keep was written by Andrea Alice Norton, one of the grand dames of 1900 science fiction, and it is the first book about D&D ever written, and I read the whole thing. It's weird, y'all. It takes a direction that no other D&D story that I'm aware of takes, and one that I kind of like, although the execution's a little bit, could have stood to be longer, but I don't necessarily think it would have been better for being longer. It's just some of the ideas that it puts forward would have been interesting. Basically, the concept is our main guy and like 5 other strangers from around the world all get isekai'd into D&D characters, and they sort of just wake up in this world in Greyhawk, and they all have this bracelet on their wrist that won't come off, and the bracelet is like solid metal, and it's got these like dice in it, and whenever weird shit is about to go down, the dice start spinning, and that is the most we ever get into the physical mechanics of the game of D&D. It's just like they can tell a combat encounter is going to start happening because their wrist is rolling for initiative.
Do you know what's fascinating about this? This is 3 years before the Jumanji short story came out.
Whoa.
Because you would think, oh, they just did Jumanji with D&D. No.
Well,
quite the opposite.
But that's the thing that's actually so weird about this, even by the standards of like isekai or like portal fantasy or that kind of thing. You'd think it would be a bigger deal that these like 6 randos from real Earth wake up in this alternate world and are now like big buff D&D people. The memories of like the actual D&D guy who our main boy Martin gets isekai'd into is like kind of just like zones back in and is like, that's weird. I don't remember how I got to this tavern or where this bracelet came from. And then like a wizard basically summons these people up and is like, something terrifying is afoot. There's an incursion from another world. I barely understand what's going on. I managed to like stop it from being a total takeover, so you all still have your minds. I'm geishing you to go on a quest to take out whatever's doing this and stop this incursion into our reality from this other world called Earth. And I was like, oh, this is kind of tight, actually. The idea that like in this universe, the Gary Gygax equivalent is some kind of like dark sorcerer on Earth who thinks they'll make the game better if he can just yeet people bodily into the world of O-Earth, where Greyhawk is, I guess. And a wizard is like manages to be in tune enough with the cosmic bends of reality to be aware that this is happening and terrified. Like, this is an edition of D&D where the primary conflict is law versus chaos, because they were just ripping this straight out of Michael Moorcock, like Elric Saga stuff. So there's forces of law and there's forces of chaos and there's neutral forces that are ostensibly in the middle. So initially our main boy is like, he's a swordsman, so he's a warrior of law. And he's like, could this be some kind of trap from chaos? And the wizard has to be like, okay, fucking stop. Tell me where I lost you. We're talking about shit well beyond law and chaos here.
Final Fantasy Chaos. Done in P3.
This is a weird one. There's like a moment around like the halfway point where our protagonist is like trying to delve back into his memories of like being normal dude Martin back on Earth. And then at some point he just decides like, actually that's irrelevant and I'm never going to think about that again. And then he's just like, I'm swordsman Milo What's-His-Nuts for the entire rest of the book. And at the very end, when they defeat the dungeon master somehow, they're not even entirely clear on how they do it. I'm not just minimizing. They're all like, well, I guess there's no way back for us, but we can just keep going on adventures together as a party. That sounds like fun. And they're all like, yeah, okay, cool. And then they just march off into the world of O-Earth and the city of Greyhawk, and everything's fun, I guess. Like I said, this one is a weird one. It's kind of before a lot of the tropes get locked. Like you said, 3 years pre-Jumanji.
Yeah.
So the fact that an isekai scenario is involved at all, it just feels very strange. But I had to highlight it. This thing is so wild.
Yeah.
And the sheer concept of D&D as a game imposing itself onto the real fantasy world that it's ostensibly set in. Very meta, very interesting, doesn't really capture the vibe of actually playing it, clearly not intending to do so, but still very noteworthy. And also the cover art is accurate. They do at one point go and talk with a gold dragon. And when I tell you, that the cover art being accurate is a rarity in this kind of fantasy novel, you have to believe me. Like, I was not expecting that to actually be a thing that happens. A scant 5 years after that is the one that probably a lot more people are familiar with. The 1983...
Looks like the 80s.
Yo, you know it. It's the 1983 Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. Woo! This is also an isekai story, but the complete opposite flavor, where instead of getting yoked into the bodies of badass warriors that are actually prepared for the perils of the world they live in, 6 kids ages like 8 to 14 get chucked bodily into the world of Dungeons & Dragons with no abilities, never gain abilities. They are just given magic items that sort of approximate class features and are like, good luck, children. Have fun fighting Tiamat in episode 1. Unironically, there's something very charming about this. It is abundantly 80s, abundantly for babies. It is a little bit weirdly, like, lore accurate in places. I mean, also lore inaccurate in places, because they defeat Tiamat by, like, trapping her in a cave, and it's like, I don't think that would work on... on the evil dragon goddess.
Good thing Tiamat is incredibly weak physically.
Yeah, you kind of get the impression that maybe the bad guys are like, oh, these are children, let's pull our punches. But not really. I mean, the thing is, like, the main villain, Venger, it's been a little while since I actually watched this, voiced by Optimus Prime, which is quite distracting. His thing is that he wants their magic items and he will stop at nothing to get them. And they are, of course, also at the mercy of the Dungeon Master, who is just a little dude. He's a benevolent question mark trickster who just keeps popping up to be like, hello children, your lesson this week is to learn to trust one another through adversity. Bye-bye now. And since the children are very much like, boy, we would love to go home, the fact that he's got these like ultimate cosmic powers and never uses them to help them in that specific way for reasons, it's a little suspect.
Mixes Piddle ass story concession.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's not a hot take that maybe the Dungeon Master is the real villain. Like, this show is, 42 years old. People have been making this point for a while. I will say one funny thing about this, in the sense of like maybe the villains are pulling their punches, is that these kids have recently been used in like more recent comic runs where they get crossed over with a bunch of other characters from far more serious D&D stories, and you really get the feeling that all of those guys are like, we gotta ratchet the dark levels back like 5 notches because we're dealing with actual children.
This reminds me of the Hugbees video about the various Archie comics crossovers.
Oh yeah. Archie meets the Punisher.
I think you've talked about this in some detailed diatribe, or some trope talks as well, where it's like, depending on who crosses over with whom and who's the, more home turf character, everyone else bends to make the story fit.
The most shocking thing about Archie meets the Punisher is that it's good. And that it actually manages to bridge the tonal gap.
I cannot let us get sidetracked. Please resume.
Sorry, you're so right. The thing is, this is simultaneously a little bit more and less true to D&D than Quag Keep was, because it's basically like, our heroes don't have class levels, they don't go up levels, they don't gain XP, they're using magic items that are essentially serving as training wheels, and the focus pretty much every episode is that the kids learn a very important lesson about, like, friendship and listening to your superiors or whatever. It's not really that focused with like challenge rating, game mechanics, anything else. It is set in D&D, but our kids are not D&D characters. They're human kids in Ren Fair garb, just kind of doing their best. So like, it's quite a vibe, but it doesn't really capture that feel of like, we're at the table and here's the story that's being told.
Yeah.
You start getting that theoretically a little bit when you're later with Dragonlance. Dragonlance is 2 things. It is a set of modules for AD&D, and it is also a set of novelizations of those modules. And they were in fact written very close to each other by the same writing team, basically. So I actually did like compare and contrast between the module and this novel, and it is beat for beat. The things from the module happen, and there's maybe a little extra spice and flavor text. Like, this does not even recommend that you make your own character for them. They give you pre-mades, and they're like, here are the characters you should play. And if this character is being played, this is what they do at this point. And like, if they're an NPC, this is what they do at this point. It's very on rails. It's very intended to be like a specific story, and you could kind of look at the novelization as like the golden timeline of like, if everything went exactly according to plan and everyone played their roles as soulfully as possible.
I guess it's like, in a case of what is the point of D&D? Is it to allow the player to express themselves, or is it to tell a particular story? And if your objective is tell a particular story, which it seems like it would be if you are writing a module and a book, it's like, the module's gonna be super hella on rails.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I can't speak to how on rails later modules and later novels in the series are. I will say the first book is not bad, it's just exactly what it says on the box. If anything, like, the novel is completely serviceable and the module suffers a little bit from being so very specific.
Yeah.
Which is
reminds
all right.
me of the like the Telltale games, The Walking Dead, the Telltale Game of Thrones, where it's like, you have choices as a character in this world. Only 3 choices you make in the entire 12-hour runtime actually matter.
Yeah. The illusion of choice. I also learned today that there's an animated movie adaptation of this novel from 2008. It looks decently faithful, albeit pretty truncated, and it looks like absolute ass. It's like they spent all the budget on a kind of all-star voice cast, and then the remaining $3 went into actually animating it.
Oh my god.
It's wild. But yeah, no, this is a thing. It's probably the first of what you would consider to be the current zeitgeist of D&D novels, in that it is a novel set in the world, a world of D&D. And it could very easily be the story that the players play out without any of the messy chance, the dice potentially messing things up, the characters, you know, going off the rails a little bit.
Oh my god, the movie is like cartoon characters plus 3D animated monsters.
And they fight each other
what
a
a
lot.
nightmare.
It looks so bad. It's buck wild.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wild. Okay, resume.
Yes, a thing that GMs are told if they're sort of more prone to railroading and like really powerful DMPCs is maybe you should just write a novel instead if like the DM clearly has a story in their head they want to tell and they're sort of treating the players as an impediment to that. I think this might be the first instance of that. And like, props to them. They did write a novel. They did both. So a few years later, DC Comics picked up a few different runs of various comics set in the world of D&D. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, they did a Dragonlance one, which is set in the same world as the other Dragonlance, has some of the same characters in it, Forgotten Realms, and Spelljammer being based on the module Spelljammer, where basically there were enough D&D setting worlds now that people were like, can I travel from one to the other? And they were like, yeah, here's spaceships now. There's wild space and spaceships, and you can go fly between them now. If you want to visit Dragonlance and also Greyhawk, you can do both of those things. Each of the comics had a different party of clearly PCs, and they crossed over on occasion, especially Spelljammer. Very firmly set in the world of D&D, there's no game-based meta commentary, nobody's rolling dice, you never see like the party around the table cracking wise, eating snacks. But the characters do at times crack wise and make jokes in a somewhat more D&D way than like anyone ever does in the novel. There's a certain degree to which the dialogue does feel like people having fun.
Yeah.
I'll accuse the Dragonlance novel of a lot of things, but the characters are not having a tremendous amount of fun.
This panel on the right here is iconic. That's so much fun.
I freaking love it. Unironically, I really like these comics, like way more than I expected to.
Like, I can see the players behind this game. In this panel of like the DM and whoever's playing this like warrior character.
Yeah.
Just laughing as they like actually hang out in real life together. And then this is an adaptation of that story. This is the first one where I can actually see that happening.
Yes, I was at war with myself over which panels to use for this like this example, because there are so many really good bits.
I'll do you a favor. Show several on screen right now.
Oh yeah! Whoa! That's crazy! I can't believe the Beholder said that. Okay, I'll add those in post. But one thing that I do really like about these comics...
Beholder canceled for saying that. I don't know what it is, but it's gonna be really funny in context afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing that I do quite like is that it's probably the easiest possible way to make the lore work, but all the spellcasters do use exclusively spells from the game.
Low bar.
Yes, but if they're using a particularly high level one, like, people will be like, oh my god, I had no idea she was powerful enough to cast Finger of Death. Or like, I think there's one case where a character claims to have used Disintegrate, but actually has cast the illusion spell Phantasmal Force, and she's like, I'm not even high enough level to cast Disintegrate yet, and it's like, ooh, that's fun. Also, this comic runs over the interval of time where AD&D First Edition was swapped out with AD&D Second Edition, and this happened in universe. There was a big, like, god war. Essentially, all the gods got kicked out of the heavens for a stretch and were running around in the bodies of some of their most loyal followers doing stuff. There was some reshuffling. In one of the comic runs, this is happening actively, and the wizard is, like, having a really bad time, and then when he gets his spell back, he's like, oh, everything's different. Some of these are stronger, some of them are more complicated, and why did they make my magic missile weaker? And it's like, he's complaining about actual mechanical changes.
That's great.
Yeah. Nobody ever, like, celebrates a crit or, like, tries to weasel game mechanics, but you you can see the turn-taking rhythm of D&D. You can definitely spot, like, when someone rolls bad, or bungles a skill check, or makes a pretty good stealth roll and then gets caught by, like, a really good spot check. So it's good. It's, unironically, I find these very charming. I do think these are some of the earliest things that actually capture the feeling of playing D&D. Pretty good that it still holds up, 4 editions later.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that had pretty long tails in the cultural impact department, 1988 also saw the first of the Forgotten Realms novels. More specifically, the first of the novels where Drizzt Do'Urden shows up, a character who is still...
Explain to me what the fuck a Drizzt Do'Urden is.
I'm so glad you asked me that. Okay.
Explain it to me quickly, because I realize I made a mistake.
No, don't worry. There's a short explanation on this very slide. We'll basically just breeze through that. This is the first book in this setting. Author R.A. Salvatore picked a spot on the map of the Forgotten Realms that nobody else was using and was like, this is now the Icewind Dale where this thing is happening.
Clarification, Forgotten Realms are all of the D&D realms?
Forgotten Realms is this specific world.
So it's just one of them.
Just one.
It's not Planescape, though.
No, Planescape is later.
I swear to Christ.
I know. So in this specific world, there are 4 main characters in this book. A couple background characters get upgraded to being main characters in later books. But in this one, there's a little halfling thief, there's a dwarf fighter, there's a human barbarian, and there's a drow ranger, rebel and exile from his homeland. Because he's not evil like the other drow. He's good, he has a moral compass, and he braved the surface sunlight and protects humans who hate and fear him because he has good in his heart. So he's the one that everyone was like, he's the interesting one. Can we have more books about that guy, please? And Salvatore was like, okay. Apparently when he initially pitched the book on a whim, he was like, what sets this guy apart is he's a dark elf. And they were like, are you sure? That sounds a little dicey. And they're like, he's fine. He's just gonna be a sidekick to the far more interesting human barbarian Wolfgar with big hammer that he can throw and get back with magic. Don't look up when Marvel Comics started doing Thor. But so this guy, he's not a very complicated character. He's truly just a good dude who tries his best in a world that, like, discriminates against him because they look at him and they're like, oh my god, a dark elf, they're all evil and scary and shit like that. And then they just wrote like 40 more books about him.
Insanity.
He's truly just a guy doing his best. He holds a very special place in my heart. I will unironically admit to liking these books despite acknowledging firmly they're not great. These are books that unironically describe his eyes as lavender orbs. It's awesome.
Classic.
But yes, so there's a few little fun details that I thought are interesting. This book comes out 1 year before AD&D 2nd edition. The mechanics are all original D&D lore, some of which I was kind of confused by because the way they describe it, drow have infravision. They can't see in the dark, they can see heat signatures, which is objectively much cooler. That's a way more cool way to do it mechanically, but eventually they're like, that's confusing, they can just see in the dark now. And all of his like drow equipment loses effectiveness after he's been out of the Underdark for a month, and now it's like, oh, my armor has gotten shittier and my weapon doesn't do as much damage. That's annoying, and that used to be a thing that happened. I don't think any of these mechanics are still the case, but it's pretty neat. I will say that this book does not really have many recognizable game mechanics at play. It's very much a story that is taking place in the world of D&D, and it does have like these
just one of
four.
them, though.
Yeah, just one of the world. It's the Forgotten Realm, actually. The combat is written to be a lot more freeform, a lot less mechanical. There's not really any turn-taking or initiative orders. The spells listed are correct in what they are, and I think people are casting the right number of them at the right time. There are also a couple moments where like, oh, I forgot this other character was in the room and could do something about this situation. Like, it's in like nearly the end. The big bad of this is an evil wizard with a magical crystal or whatever, and he's got Drizzt stuck in a trap, and he's like, aha, with my magic candle, I'm shooting lasers at you, and then this little halfling friend who has been pretending to be brainwashed just blows the candle out, and Drizzt is free, and they're both like, what the fuck? And the halfling is like, I also was not expecting that I could do that. And I was like, I could see that happening above table very much. I could see, hey DM, can I blow the candle out? I'm like, he thinks I'm brainwashed, I'm right next to him, right? Can I just blow the candle out? I guess you can blow the candle out, okay. So that was charming, but it was a pretty rare moment. These books are not trying to be true to the game, I think. I get the impression that Salvatore likes writing combat, but does not like writing turn-taking combat, and that's fair, because it's frankly not all that interesting, so.
Yeah. There is, unfortunately, the whole problem of, like, when you take an interactive medium and you turn it into something that is not interactive, for whatever you gain by switching mediums, you also lose a lot from the lack of interactivity because that creates so much investment on the part of the player. So when you essentially swap a player for a reader or viewer, depending on what other new medium you choose, you have to make some new decisions. And that's, I'm sure, something we'll address as we go through the rest of these, but it is something that I know, like, Zero Punctuation, fully emblematic, Yahtzee Croshaw has a whole thing of, like, interactive storytelling is so different different from everything else that exists on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And you need to do different things in a video game to make it interesting. Or in the case of like a table game, you know,
a TTRPG,
you need to do different things. And then when you pull it out of that, it's like, okay, you can't rely on the interactivity to be fun. You need to put in a lot more work now.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you brought that up because I knew you were going to have an angle on this from a more like video game standpoint than I have. And that is also like an interesting thing of like when you take a video game and you turn it into a story that isn't a video game, how much of the story do you have to change to keep things interesting? Like a grind is the most boring thing to watch, but it can be interesting to play. So that's something that has to change a lot of the time. There's definitely, in a few of these later novels, you can sort of see the part where it's like, okay, I'm going to throw a whole corridor of trolls at our main character. Do I want to write 3 pages of Caddy Bree shooting them with arrows, or am I just gonna have her run past them? I think she's gonna run past them, and like, So anyway, so this is kind of a swerve, but I had to bring this up. In 1990, Knights of the Dinner Table started happening. This is a genre of comedy that has almost exclusively moved into the video game field recently, and by recently I mean within the last 20 years. Almost all D&D commentary in the 80s and 90s was this sort of above table jokes of like weird stuff that happens when you are trying to play the game. And Knights of the Dinner Table is sort of the paragon example of that, of just like a crew of, you know, a DM and their 4 rowdy players who are, you know, misunderstanding things, foiling their plans, power gaming, you know, being a bunch of munchkins about it. And in fact, Knights of the Dinner Table was a repository for punchlines. People could write in and submit stories of things that happened at their game, and it would be played out by the characters around the table. That's in a funny. Later issue. Yeah.
It becomes like an archive of everyone's best over-the-table moments.
Yes,
and
exactly.
And then it's a lot more fun to read it in comic form than it is to have it explained to you.
Exactly, yes. One of the examples that actually became sort of mimetic in like the D&D fandom space in the ages before the current zeitgeist, which we will get to, is like I described a gazebo in the garden and my players didn't know what a gazebo was and they assumed it was an enemy and they had to destroy it. So then DMs would be like, oh, but joke's on them. This time I included an actual killer gazebo. It's a big mimic or something like that. So like the attack of the killer gazebo is like it's a whole thing.
Nice.
It was really funny in the 90s, I assume. But there were other comics in this vein, and I will bring up things in this general area later. But like this sort of comedic meta commentary based on the absurdity of the way that D&D plays above table, this was just a thing that like people were making jokes out of, telling stories about. This has definitely seen a serious downturn because almost all of the comedy of this style just turned into gamer web comics in the early 2000s, where it's like you can make the same joke, but it's 2 guys on a couch instead of 5 people around a kitchen table, you know, that kind of thing.
And now you just do it as like acting out on YouTube Shorts and stuff, which I guess is closer to the actual at-table moment in a way. Yeah, it makes sense that the function that it has remains. It has just updated much more aggressively and much more quickly with changing media around fan culture in general, which feels like it's interesting that this is the one part that is much more attuned to fan culture because it is much more distinctly meta on the face of it than the actual stories that are trying to be at least nominally in world.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. In fact, to keep things like legally buttoned up, the characters would almost never name drop actual games. Instead of Dungeons and Dragons, they were mostly playing legally distinct Hackmaster, which has since become a real game system that I have actually played at least once.
That's funny.
Yes, it's like D&D, but everything's cranked up to 11. But yeah, so I felt like I had to bring this up. It's a little bit of a swerve after like the AD&D comics, Triss Doran, and it's like also these losers. But like, no, it's like this was a legitimately important part of the way people turned their game stories into funny things for other people to know about. You can either go deep into committing to the story of the world and telling the story from the inside, or you can tell the story from the outside, and this is telling the story from the outside.
And like the guys on YouTube Shorts that like read funny like Tumblr posts it's like the apotheosis of that same thing. It's very much in that, Yeah,
it's the evolution of the same sort of like, a funny thing happened when I was doing this thing, observational comedy format.
Yeah.
Exact same year, it's anime time, Record of Lodoss War. This, to me, is a really interesting example in the space of story that started as a D&D game and got turned into something else. Because the original actual play of Lodoss War, you can still find archived in the magazine Comptic starting in 19 1986, and one guy on Reddit has done English translations of the first 2 campaigns, and shout out to that guy.
Fan communities rely entirely on the one person per community that is willing to put in way too much fucking work to achieve something.
You know it, especially translating little-known pieces of media from Japan.
If you want to understand how material gets lost over time and how stuff was preserved, it is shit like this.
You know it. But yes, so there is a 13-episode OVA series that came out in 1990 that is a loose adaptation of the first, and then also second and third major campaigns of the Lodoss War game. The second and third are all crammed into the last 5 episodes, so it's not great. And that's I guess my boiling hot take about Lodoss War is it looks stunning. It's absolutely gorgeous. The animation is beautiful. The character designs are iconic. Story-wise, it's not fantastic. This is the only thing that gets 2 slides because I have a little compare and contrast on the next one. But I do think that it's worth, like, Lodoss War was incredibly influential, if nothing else, just for the character design, and it has the distinction that it takes itself entirely seriously. Like, it's from the same era as anime like Slayers, which is also sort of like high magic, high fantasy, a D&D-esque setting, but Slayers is a full-blown comedy most of the time. Like, I've seen it described as like Lodoss War is the game that your DM wishes they were running, and Slayers is the game they're actually running in terms of like the hijinks to plot advancement ratio. It's also 1000% responsible for both the blonde, green-eyed elf girl design that shows up in every anime, and also that's Ganondorf. That's a couple years before Ganondorf got a human design in every Nintendo game, and that's him right there, officer. So that was pretty fun. Game mechanics aren't exactly front and center. The characters, they'll definitely like fail saves, they'll goof and set off traps. There's one scene that is definitely somebody hitting a nat 20 to take out a dragon, which is pretty cool. And the broader D&D format of like, you go to the king and he gives you a quest, and then you come back and he gives you a reward. Elves are these uniquely magical beings in a way that nobody else is. Here are some NPCs that are clearly like 15 levels higher than all of you, and they're gonna do the hard carrying for this fight. And there's a couple awkward points where the pacing of the anime struggles because the replays do exist and like can be found. There's kind of a unique like compare and contrast opportunity here. And because I did in fact read the entire replay record of the first 2 Lodoss War campaigns, I am sort of uniquely qualified to do some of that compare and contrast. I'm not gonna make y'all suffer through the blow by blow. And I am gonna also bring up in 1998, they did a slightly longer anime adaptation of the first and I think second campaigns, which gives a little bit more time to the stuff that all got crammed in the last 5 episodes of the first OVA series. We switch over to a new group of PCs like 10 years later, and like all the old PCs are like higher level and they're all like kings of their own little kingdoms now and that kind of thing. So on the rare occasions they do turn up, it is to help out as extremely overpowered DM PCs.
Oh, it's campaign 3 of Critical Role.
Yes, exactly. But the downside of this is that because there are so many characters running around with I'm a player character stamped on them, there's just so many of these guys, and they will sometimes just kind of show up without explanation and be like, what's up, I have a unique character design and we're gonna travel together now. A little bit distracting, especially around the 3rd time it happens. The funny thing is, in the actual like recap of the second campaign, they sort of do a little like, okay, we finally wrapped it all up, how do all the players feel? And a lot of the players are like, we didn't get to do much. It was kind of just all these really powerful NPCs all fighting each other and we couldn't really participate. And the DM was like, oh yeah, I did kind of let that get away from myself, which I thought was fascinating because I definitely did also notice that, but I wasn't expecting it to have made it from the table to the screen, as it were. And because they are so faithful to like, we're gonna tell the story basically as it played out the first time, there's a major character death that just kind of happens from a string of really bad dice luck in the middle of this like campaign with no resolution in sight. Like, this dude's character arc is barely halfway done and they're like, rip, Orson has become a star in the heavens, goodbye. And you know, loyally in the 1998 version, Orson fucking dies, like really kind of abruptly. They do sand some of the edges off of it, I will say that. In the replay, it's truly just like, oh, that sucks, man. We burned 3 wish spells trying to bring you back and you rolled like shit every time, so Orson's just dead. Here you can play your character Parn from the first campaign, I guess, which is just like really rough. And in the 1998 version, they actually do give him like a little bit of a character arc around that, where like his whole thing is like, oh, he's a berserker. He's sort of possessed by this primal spirit of rage. But shortly before this, he managed to free himself from it. And now he's kind of this like soft-spoken dork and like a little bit of a weenie. But then, oh no, we're in a dangerous fight. And he's like, I have to summon the berserker spirit back. And then he does, and he kicks absolute ass. And then as soon as the rage drops, he just dies from the accumulated damage. And I was like, that's better. That's a lot better than just rolling like shit 5 times in a row.
It gets to the interesting dynamic of being able to revise a story through different adaptations, which
Yes.
we've talked about many, many times.
And we'll talk about it again.
Forms. We'll talk about it again. So I'll save it for when we get to those examples.
Yes.
But we'll asterisk mark it here of like, it is cool to be able to use adapting an actual play to a set story as opposed to just adapting the concept of D&D, which is what I think all the other ones have been so far before this. This would be the first recorded actual play that we still have the actual play of. Do I understand this is also like the first one that's based on an actual play? Because the other ones seem like they just kind of wrote a story from scratch around the concept of D&D.
So I can't tell if this is the first one to exist. It's the first one where I could find the replay, the actual play version was also extant in a form I could get.
Is it the first one on this list?
Yes. Well, I will say,
Great.
Quag Keep and the Dragonlance something Autumn Dragons were both written after having played home games that those books were then based on. But it's impossible to know how many of the events of the book are actually like drawn from events at the table versus like, yeah, this is in the module that we were also writing at the same time. It does seem like a lot of the cases here were like, we're writing the module, we're playtesting it with the player characters, and then if we get like a really good line at the table, I'll put it in the book version. We'll like really spice it up. Like, oh no, the dragon has taken one of us hostage, and now this final confrontation is way more dramatic than if it was just a fight. And it's like, okay, cool, yeah, we can throw that in. But yeah, Lodoss War is definitely the first example on this list that has such a clean-cut compare and contrast opportunity of here's the way the game went, and here's the story they pulled out of it. Because there are a lot of differences. Things have been rearranged for pacing. I will say, every problem I had with Lodoss in hindsight was kind of like, oh, they didn't fully explain this thing that was covered pretty quickly in the original game, or they kind of just assumed that we'd be invested in this when we're not.
Yeah, I guess this is a point I'm making is that this is the first example of a pipeline of adaptation from original game into final, or at least most up to date that we have, final story in some other kind of codified medium. A point we will return to later in the slideshow.
Yeah. This is definitely the first where we can see the first draft and then the later draft in the adaptation.
Yes.
Back in the subject of goofy haha meta commentary, 1998 was the first instance of the comic Nodwick, which was a satirical comic published in Dragon magazine and then also later in Dungeon magazine. You will never guess the connection between these two things.
Magazines.
Yeah, so, that and is covering a multitude of sins again. But yeah, no, its main thing was that it would sort of make gentle fun of the D&D modules that were being published in the same editions of the zine. It was like, we're gonna publish this, and then this crew of 4 adventurers would be like going through that module, pointing out silly things about it, kind of thing. It's a similar genre to Knights of the Dinner Table and published in similar magazines, but it's from the POV inside the world of this game instead of the people above table playing it. There's no dice rolls, there's no players making jokes, it's firmly set in the fantasy world of D&D and its ilk. It's not specific to D&D, it doesn't have to be. Which is another interesting point. As mentioned, Knights of the Dinner Table is also not D&D specific. And a lot of these worlds, Lodoss War was actually a campaign setting made to work across different rule sets. The game started off as D&D, but even then there were some differences in the way the game was brought over to Japan than the version that was played in the US for the most part. So the D&D part, it's D&D asterisk in a lot of these cases. The main comedy of Nodwick is sort of like in the same vein of like Discworld and The Last Unicorn, like if you know your world is sort of absurd and works on narrative conventions that are ridiculous, how do you work your way through that world? And in this case, it's like, well, what does a player do when they're confronted with a trap they don't know how to disarm? They could work through disarming it, they could take a risk, or they could throw their hireling at it and then get their cleric to heal the hireling up afterwards, and then they can just keep doing that ad infinitum. And then if you make that hireling the main character, suddenly there is a recipe for quite a lot of comedy. It's good. I read this comic a lot, and it later expanded into a more long-form story format that worked surprisingly well, and it's good. And I threw it in here because it is exactly the thing we're talking about.
Yes.
And also fun. Oh boy, a movie! Those never go bad! It's 2000, It's time for the big Dungeons & Dragons film.
Jeremy Irons.
Jeremy Irons is the main guy. He's the main bad guy. And, oh buddy, he's chewing that scenery like he's got a vitamin deficiency, my friend. It's wild. It's got a tasty 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and a much more impressive 20% audience score. Yeah, this one's so good with nothing wrong with it. No, this movie's real bad and everybody knows it. Bad guy wants a MacGuffin magical rod to control red dragons. The good guy already has a magic rod to control gold dragons. There's a ragtag bunch of misfits that are also there. They kill the black best friend halfway through the movie to show the bad guys mean business, which is when a lot of people watching realized that guy was not the main character and his far less interesting friend was actually supposed to be the main character.
Yes.
And then at one point the characters go, oh no, a beholder registered trademark, and then a beholder floats by and looks really bad. Yeah, no, this movie's not good. And like, it doesn't even have the decency to be mechanically accurate, because the MacGuffins they're all chasing after, these like rods of dragon control, there are no stats for them in the game because they would be incredibly busted.
Yeah.
A rod of gold dragon control. Gold dragons are like good aligned and all sentient. So like a rod that lets you mind control them en masse feels evil from the jump. Whatever. Nobody liked this movie. It wasn't good. There's a whole Nodwick comic making fun of it. So like that's how you know we're connecting the dots.
Classic.
It got 2 sequels that I've never watched. My sister insists that the Book of Vile Darkness is actually pretty fun. I don't believe her.
Oh God!
And I haven't
had a
checked.
copy of the Book of Vile Darkness.
No,
that
the
cannot
movie,
make for
not
a good...
the book. But yeah.
No, I know, but like, based on what I know about the book, I cannot imagine the movie is any better.
That's part of the reason why I haven't watched it, and probably won't, but I had to bring it up. Last webcomic on the list. 2003 is the start of the comic Order of the Stick. You all know what I'm about. I fucking love webcomics. Of course I was going to throw in all of them. It's in the same general clade as Nodwick and Knights of the Dinner Table. It's more a comic about the game of D&D than it is a comic set in the world of D&D. But similar to Nodwick, it also stays firmly in universe. No players, no above-table shenanigans. But unlike Nodwick, the characters are abundantly aware of game mechanics, and they will like reference dice rolls, they will like hope for crits, they will talk about XP, they will make jokes about like, we're going down a level in the dungeon, going down a level, that's bad, we want to go up a level, we've already been that level, we want to go down a level, you know, forget their class features. They talk about how NPCs with names are less disposable than NPCs without names, so they gain an actual like hit point buff if they say their names out loud. Despite the goofs and the in-universe knowledge of game mechanics and narrative conventions courtesy of the party's bard, who very much knows what makes stories exciting and loves to talk about it, there's never really a loss of immersion in the stakes of the story. The characters are all very invested in their lives and goals. The villains are very intimidating. It never really loses that D&D flavor. This comic's really, really good. Like, part of the reason why it took me a while to do this slideshow is because I got distracted reading the last 300 pages yesterday, so that's on me, but I can't help it. It's genuinely just a very good comic. It does have over 1,000 pages, and some prequel stuff that is only in print. In the same vein that, like, a little bit of self-aware comedy does not necessarily have to go into the zone of, like, bathos undercutting every important moment, Order of the Stick is one of those stories that does manage to hit the highs and lows of, like, this is a very silly thing that's happening, and this is a very heartbreaking thing that just happened, and this is a decision this character made, and they're still dealing with the consequences, like, you know, months later, and all this other stuff. So it's real good. It's hard to talk about almost on account of how good it is, so I won't. Let's move on. More comic, not a webcomic this time. Starting in 2010, there was another Dungeons & Dragons comic run, this one done by IDW, and it started with this one about, I think the party name is Fell's 5, because the main guy's last name is Fell. It started with a very charming 15-issue run written by one of the primary writers of Leverage, and that was the least surprising thing I'd ever heard when I noticed John Rogers' name on the byline. I was like, oh, that's why everyone talks like that. That's why the rogue is just Parker but small. It's tonally sincere with no fourth wall breaks, and there's no name drop game mechanics except halfling luck one time, but it really does capture the vibe of players being silly. It's another instance where the dialogue is extremely like, oh yeah, that's a character being like, well, I spotted the trap, but you did not spot the trap, so good luck with that. Little bits of above table logic sometimes sneak through. You can tell that this feels like a party of characters in universe being controlled by a bunch of players around a table having fun. This specific run only ran for 15 issues before being cut short with a dangling cliffhanger, but IDW is continuing to publish a bunch of other runs of D&D comics and adaptations. This is where the imprint based on the 80s cartoon kids showed up. There's Baldur's Gate comics that tie in with the games. There's Ravenloft comics. They have Drizzt showing up. That really threw me for a loop because I didn't realize that they could do the comics crossing over with the games. And then I saw all this stuff about like Minsk and Boo are in Baldur's Gate 3. And I was like, my boys Minsk and Boo from the comic I just read.
My favorite Glup Shitto.
Okay, yeah. The silliness level varies with the writers, but they all keep things similarly mechanically buttoned up. The character dialogue feels pretty true to the table, although most of it is not written by John Rogers, so a lot of it doesn't have that certain je ne sais quoi. It's another one that's just good and sort of hard to talk about because of that. I have to bring up Critical Role.
Yep.
It doesn't exactly count, but it's such a turning point in the timeline that we have to mention it because it changed everything about the way that people think about and talk about and perceive D&D as a storytelling medium. Because up to this point, the main thing really was you had to turn your campaign into something in order for other people to know what was up with it. Write a novel, make a comic, make an anime. You could publish a replay like they did with Lodoss War, but even that was, you know, parts of it were truncated, parts of it were summarized, parts of it had to have like extra things added in. The idea that you could simply broadcast it live and everyone would just keep up and know what was going on, that was sort of technologically gated by the fact that the tech for that did not exist in a lot of previous years that people were making D&D stuff. But Critical Role was the first ones that did it in this really big way. And one thing that I thought was interesting about the way it changed how people thought about D&D is that all of these people are incredibly talented actors, which...
Incredibly talented actors in many different areas and respects and fields, and famous roles, including everyone's favorite Ninja Turtle 20 years ago.
Basically, it's not like, oh, the bar is suddenly really high. It's more like, this is what their home game looks like, because this is just skills that they all have, that they've, trained over their various careers. But the idea that, like, your home game should have this level of performance in it was never an idea in the space of D&D before Critical Role made it look so easy.
Yeah.
D&D tables could have served double duty as writers' rooms for novels before this, but they were never treated like full-blown performances before this point. And I think that's important because a lot of people who got into D&D after this point had a perspective on what the game normally looked like that was very skewed by this being their first intro to it. And I'm not saying like pre-Critical Role D&D was better. It was fun when there was adversarial DMing where rocks fell, everyone died, and players took delight in derailing the game master's whole plot they had planned out. But it was a change, and it changed the way that D&D stories were mostly being told, and anyone who got into D&D after this point had a different perspective on what a typical D&D game could look like, or should look like in a lot of cases. So I had to mention it because it's always important to point out the point on the timeline that corresponds with the big change in what the curve looks like, and what exactly happened there.
I feel like this is probably the single most important, divergence point might not be the right word for it, but change in the way that anyone thought about D&D. Because I think any of the previous adaptations we've seen would never really break containment from people who were playing D&D a lot of the time on their own anyway.
Yeah.
Whereas this, I feel like in my experience of like hearing about it and seeing it, living through this, was like there was before where people kind of like maybe played D&D on their own or like tried it once and it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then there was after this happened and people who had never really intensely like done a whole campaign or done more than a one-shot were super invested in the concept of D&D and knew a ton about D&D without that prior experience, that this was enough of the on-ramp that you could just get into this on its own as a nearly self-contained institution and follow along with the story. That is big and different from what came before.
Before this, D&D was a nerdy hobby to have that it was socially acceptable to be bullied about doing. Ask me how I know. But Critical Role made it look easy, fun, and cool. It did not look like a bunch of nerds rolling dice around a kitchen table and saying, my ranger is going to shoot the beholder. Suddenly it's like, oh, here's a lot of like extremely cool, gorgeous people who you probably have some emotional investment in because they've probably played a character you liked at some point, and they're doing this fun thing. Maybe this thing is actually fun and cool, just like they are. And like, honestly, for rehabilitating the vibes of the hobby, endless props. I do think it's very interesting what it's done to the shape of storytelling around D&D as a result. Because, we just spent like 15 slides covering all of the different ways that this has looked in the past. And that's a very different vibe than what things are now. Part of the reason I threw in all those webcomics is because I thought it was so important to be like, here's what the conversation about this looked like back in the days when we all knew we were nerds. On the subject of Critical Role, 7 years later, quick turnaround for an adaptation, I gotta say. Legend of Vox Machina kicked off. This is like our first good compare and contrast opportunity since Lodoss War. However, I'm not qualified to do that, so I'm not gonna. I have not personally watched through all of Critical Role Campaign 1, and other people have already done this anyway. But trust me, people have gone through and done like the granular, like what got cut, what got left in, what lines got rearranged analysis, so you don't need me to do it. The thing that I thought was so interesting is that this is the exact right instance to go looking for that thing you were talking about. How does this have to change from being an interactive medium to being one that is not interactive? How does the excitement level shift? Because when you're watching it live, of course, a lot of the excitement is like, you're sort of all in the same boat. Like, you also do not know how they're getting out of this, and neither do the players, and neither does the DM, because ultimately the dice have final say a lot of the time. It's the gambling element, there's a reason people keep doing it. It does have that sort of fun charm, and, watching Critical Role live live, or even like watching the pods later, you're like, oh wow, yeah, that was a really like long shot. We had no idea if that was going to work. That stops being true when it becomes a scripted story, polished up, bundled up into like 13 episode seasons and, released for your viewing pleasure. There really isn't any uncertainty, because like, even if you don't know what's about to happen, the writers definitely did. Someone's got their hand on the steering wheel. So the excitement of the story has to take a sort of different shape, because it can't be gambling anymore. And one thing that I thought was so interesting is that Vox Machina very clearly treated the original campaign as draft one. Get all the ideas down. They don't have to be pretty. They just need to be down. And then when they had that, they could rearrange stuff, shift things to be more impactful, which I will admit was pretty funny when I think when season 1 was coming out in like 3 episode drops. I think when the second batch of episodes came out, everyone was like, I can't believe they cut the line where Vexalia says, darling, take off the mask. I can't believe they're not including that. It's such a good line. It's like, is it possible they're saving it for later, when it would be far more dramatic for Percy to take off the mask? And lo and behold, I was correct. But like, it's just, it's always kind of funny to see that happen, because it's like, oh, they're not doing the moment right now, so they're probably never gonna. And it's like, or maybe the moment is more impactful when there's been more buildup and other shit has been going on. You can drop a really hard line and then the dice don't cooperate, or like, someone makes a deception check and suddenly the awkward conversation you were having is not going anywhere anymore, that kind of thing. And while those moments can be very tense to play or watch being played live, doesn't mean it's automatically exciting on its own merit. But also on the flip side, there are completely different limitations between the medium of a game being played at a table and a show happening. Like, it's general DMing rule that it's not great or fun to sideline any of the characters for a stretch of time with nothing to do. It can be fun for a character to run a solo mission, but it's not necessarily fun for like the DM to essentially run a game for one player for 3 hours while everyone else just kind of sits around. Which is part of why the general rule of like never split the party applies, because if you split the party, that means each of you is getting half of the game time to do anything, because for the rest of it, you're not there, you can't do anything. Like, it can still be very fun, don't get me wrong. Like, when I'm playing Rolling with Difficulty, half the fun is doing little out-of-character commentary and being like, you've just got a little version of my character in your pocket that's commenting on things, don't worry about it. But like, that's not true to the story. That's making fun in a situation that is not automatically interesting. But TV shows don't give a shit about that. A fictional character, especially an animated one, like, you just don't need to draw them in a scene, and it's fine. Like,
it's actually only better.
Yeah, no one's getting mad. Like, I think, is it Phil Lamar who mentioned that like playing Samurai Jack was so fun because like they just call him in and he'd say 3 lines and then get paid and then leave.
Tell me where I can find Aku. I see. I will go there. And then I'm done for the day. That's the episode.
He gets the paycheck and he gets to leave, baby. It's awesome. Yeah. But yeah, the limitations of the mediums are completely different. The considerations are different. You don't have to have all the characters on at all times. And like, one of the major things with Campaign 1 is that Ashley Johnson was out a lot filming Blind Spot. So Pike can't always be there for the important bits. And like, they'd have her Skype in and be like, Pike is astrally projecting her body to come and fight with you. Guys, it's fun. They don't need to do any of that in the show. They can do little bits of it in like a cool moment, but they don't need her to be absent. They can have her show up for things that maybe her character was there for, but her player wasn't. Things are not always lost in the process. Like, there's always going to be changes, but it's because the mediums are so different. You can't just translate 400 hours into 3 seasons of television without reshuffling some things for, effectiveness.
Also, the fight scenes are really good.
Yes.
The fight scenes in the show are extremely good. And it is so much more satisfying to see it in this compared to watching an episode of Critical Role, because like I watched some Dimension 20 on Dropout with the second person in Dungeons and Dragons, Brendan Lee, the vice president of D&D, Brendan Lee Mulligan.
Hell yeah!
And I always found it very funny that there is like one episode where the players talk, and one episode of combat, and one episode where the players talk, and one episode, because combat is that fucking slow that you have to devote an entire episode to it, or it's just not gonna happen. And it's cool to see very complex choreography clearly based on the intricate mechanical details of how these fights actually went down, or at least inspired by the intricate detail of how these fights actually went down on the table. And then it's like, great, that took 4.5 hours to play through. It actually happens in 12 seconds, and it's a really compelling 12 seconds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the really fun things about Vox Machina is that all those really cool things that Matt described, we actually get to see how they look. I think he said like that was one of his favorite things about getting to make this this is like, he said it, and then he gets to actually see it, and he's like, oh, that is really cool, actually.
Yeah.
But also it let them do like some massaging of game mechanics. Like when they first played the home game, they were playing Pathfinder, and then they ported a bunch of items from Pathfinder to D&D to play it, long form. And that included giving Vax these like boots of haste that were incredibly busted because he basically just got a free haste spell every like fight that couldn't be made to drop when someone dropped concentration. So he was just getting like full extra action, crazy movement speed. So in Vox Machina, they make that a component of the legendary god armor he picks up. And it's like, this also makes him really fast. And that's good. That's smart. That's a really smart way to do it. And there's a lot of plot points that you can do that would not be fun mechanically to play out. Anything that's kind of grindy or like you don't get to make progress until this thing happens. Like one of the things I noticed in Vox Machina is that almost every boss fight is nothing works until the final blow works. Like anytime they fight a dragon, basically they're doing no damage, and then they figure out the way to do all the damage, and then they do all the damage and the dragon dies. Because that is objectively more interesting to watch than chip damage until you hit it with the axe the final time, and this time it works.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of tedious because it turns it into a puzzle box where it's like, this is a lock, what's the key? Oh, he's got a weak point. They hit the inverse scale, dungeon meshy style. I think in season 3, they're like, oh, we did a ton of damage to the dragon, but now he's flown off and he gets a long rest, so he's gonna be fucking fine. And it's like, yeah, that's unfortunate. I feel bad, man. But objectively, it's more interesting to watch the players have to solve a puzzle. Whereas anyone in D&D can tell you, getting hit with a puzzle that you can't figure out feels terrible. It fucking sucks when it's like the DM, I'm disappointing the DM. They're expecting something of me and I'm just not connecting the dots.
It's also the big problem I have with D&D combat is kind of endemic to the game is the ability to miss. Or you try something and then nothing happens. You miss, nothing happens, you have to wait another 40 minutes until it's your turn again.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the game, and that creates stakes that you can miss. That is a feature.
Yes.
However, that does not mean it's fun to actually play in some cases, depending on what kind of player you are. What I like about this and the way they can modify the combat is that if someone misses, that's fine. But also that just becomes part of the scene setting of blasts are flying everywhere in this combat encounter. And it's not like, yes, it's your turn. You have an opportunity to do a lot of damage. And if you don't, everyone's going to die. It's just another arrow shot into the, like, okay, cool. One thing solved. But to the point about the boots of haste, what I also like about doing an adaptation this way is that you have the entire story arrayed in front of you as you go to essentially rewrite it, edit it, condense it down, and make it fit into this medium. And you have an opportunity to take things that just kind of happen, because in D&D, that's the dice. A lot of things just kind of happen, and it is random chance or random ordering that they happen in the way that they do. You can take all of those things and make them mean something. You have the opportunity to make every single random thing that happens in the game, every single item you pick up, every single random NPC encounter, to make it mean something, either within its own little moment by rewriting it to just make it better, or by having things connect, such as in season 3, when they go down into hell to do plot points that I forget about, they change the demon that they're bargaining with to a character from Calamity, which is a huge change from Xerxes Illares, right?
He was a PC, tried to redeem Asmodeus, it didn't go so hot, and now he's down there.
So they completely swapped out a character, but the effect that it has, especially for people who watched all of this stuff and people who were invested, is hugely satisfying. Those are the kinds of things that you can do, especially when you are dealing with an audience that is assumed to already know the ins and outs of everything that happened in the main game, but it still works if, like me, you didn't actually watch all 700 hours of Critical Role, so it's fine.
No, I watched through seasons 1 through 3 with some mutual friends of ours who had not watched any Critical Role, and I was trying so hard to not spoil major things, although I will say when, spoiler alert, in season 3, Percy dies, they were both like sort of devastated and also being like, but I mean, it's D&D, so like, when are they gonna resurrect him? Because fucking obviously. And that's also another really interesting thing. Like, it's this change that season 3 made where like Percy stays dead for way longer. He's like out for almost the entire final fight. And I like the explanation I've seen where people are like, they were fighting a fire guy who used only fire moves, and Percy's whole thing is that he is constantly carrying tons of black powder on his person, right? Like, he wouldn't have done good in that fight. It would have been real bad for him. It's okay if he gets to sit this one out. But also, like, you couldn't really pull that at the table because it wouldn't be fair to Taliesin to be like, sorry, your character's done. You can't participate in the big final boss fight. Like, it's completely fine to put Percy as a character on the sidelines, but it would have have been kind of bad to do that to his player who would not be able to participate for a week. Vox Machina is a really good instance of an adaptation of an actual play campaign that is different from the original in ways that only serve to make it work really well without losing all of that like really fun D&D vibe that is the thing that we've been sort of talking about this whole time. It's like, how do you capture the actual fun of the table, like the actual fun of the play? Like you said, in a D&D game, shit will just happen. But when you can go back and sort of like turn it into an overarching story, a lot of those little things can turn into foreshadowing. It can be really fun to do that because you're like, oh my god, I'm a genius. Like the dice corresponded perfectly to let this thing happen in such a poetic way. And, you know, when they don't, you can also change things. I think in season 1, I want to say, they change who takes like a nearly fatal blow in the final fight with Delilah, I want to say. I think in the original it's Vex, and in the show they do it to Keyleth instead.
Yeah,
it's just because
I think they give Keyleth the big moment.
Right, but there's 2 reasons for that. One of them being Vex had already fully died that season and been revived, and it was a whole scary moment for everybody. And 2, Vex and Keyleth were sort of like, they weren't beefing because it wasn't mutual, but Vex didn't like her very much because she was like, she's going to take my brother away from me. That's fucked up. So when Keyleth gets to like take a bullet for her and save her, it's like, oh, great, now we can be friends actually. Like that was awesome. So it's a way to just sort of like rearrange a couple things to tighten up plot points that did not have any connection in the original, but when you chain them together for a scripted story, the connection happens anyway. Anyway, this show's really good, and I'm glad
Really
you
good.
had so many thoughts on it, because I know that I think you watched it before I did and was like, this fucking rules.
It's really, really good. The season that I like the least is the second one because it's largely them just going around and getting items.
Yeah,
it
the
feels
vestiges.
the most gamey. The vestiges, yeah. It feels the most gamey because there's no real overarching thrust. There's nothing they're working against. There's no distinct villain presence that's driving anything. Like the Briarwoods in season 1 are great. The Conclave really is in the story in season 3. They're great. In season 2, they just kind of split up. They go get some things. There's a moment with Vax and the Raven Queen, which is like cool. I like that element, but so much of the season is just kind of going around picking up stuff in a very gamey, artificial feeling way that manages to survive the translation to screen. But season 1 and season 3 are so well constructed with the party moving in this specific goal and having these opponents that represent something thematically that they have to overcome by who they are, whereas getting the vestiges is just you go, you beat the traps, you kill some monsters, you get the vestiges, okay, cool, now we get to go fight the Chroma Conclave for real.
Yeah.
That's the one asterisk, but like to contrast against season 1 and season 3 doing it so well.
Season 2, it was also basically the season where everyone went up a level, you know, mechanically speaking. Like, everyone gets something cool that happens that lets them redesign their character a little bit or something like that. I did have 2 things that reminded me of that I thought were really interesting. One of them being in season 2, that's when Grog gets Craven Edge, which is the evil vampiric sword he picks up from Silas Briarwood. And that's like a whole running thing throughout the game for a while, because Travis, he plays Grog dumb, but Travis is a keenly smart player who likes like doing unexpected big swings to see what happens. So he keeps like, no one else can fucking figure out that the sword is sentient, evil, and talking to Grog and making him worse. And he's like so good at making sure that nobody ever finds out. Like that bit in season 2 where like he goes off into the into the privy with Craven Edge to have a secret conversation, and he just has Scanlan like sing loudly to cover the noises, quote unquote. Like that's straight out the table. That's literally it. But that bit went on for so much longer, and like there were all these questions like, what's gonna happen? Like, when's the other shoe gonna drop? I think there's even a bit where like he does tell Scanlan like, the sword talks to me sometimes, and he gives it to Scanlan, and the sword is like, you should kill people, and he's like, do you hear it? And Scanlan's like, no, and everyone else at the table is like, what the fuck are you doing, Sam? So, but that's like a really good bit at the table, and they give it exactly as much screen time as it should have in season 2, which is way less. They do like the 2 big hits, and then as soon as it makes him hurt Pike, he's like, okay, this sword needs to die, and he snaps it in half, and then they make him have consequences for that in the show that aren't there in the original. He gets like debuffed. He's like, his strength score gets drained until he believes in himself really hard and then gets it back. That's another, bouncing all over the place. In that that season, he fights that monk guy in the arena, and the guy's like, where do you find your strength? And he can't figure out the answer. In the original game, he does figure out the answer. In that fight, he's like, from my friends. And the guy's like, congratulations, you have had a cool monk fight and figured something out about yourself. Peace. But in the show, they save that moment of revelation for way later, after he's already like destroyed the sword and lost his physical strength. And he's like, where do I find my strength? I need to figure this out because I'm getting my ass kicked.
Yeah.
And that's a way more impactful way to use those two story beats rather than just being two things that happen. And the last thing I wanted to mention is just the way that they handle the magic system, because that is probably the point that feels almost the least D&D, because individual identifiable D&D spells do get used, and the idea of like, oh, I'm out of spell slots, I'm sorry, I can't cast this anymore, I'm done, I'm tapped, like that does show up. But because they sort of try and make the magic system a little bit more fluid, and they stand off a lot of D&D specific serial numbers for various reasons, you know, Pike is always doing sort of like holy magic or something like that, you know, calling on the Everlight, but also maybe the power was within her all along or something, and Scanlan's doing music magic. That's great, that's fine, that's awesome. And then there's Keyleth, who's like, I bend all four elements to my will, and I have the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, and like the end result is that just because of the sheer diversity of druid spells that Keyleth has access to, she ends up coming across as far more powerful than anyone else in the party, even though they are all supposedly the same level, just because she's like, I'm not great at fire, but I've figured it out, and now I can turn into a primordial fire elemental and f*** shit up, and it's awesome. And it's like, oh, cool. So the power curve is like everyone else. And then Keyleth all the way up here, which is as it should be. She is on track to become basically a physical god. And like, that's really fun to me. I like that a lot because they really kind of had to cover their bases on like, how do we explain what the limitations on her magic actually are? Because if it's just all of nature, that's everything. And I just think that's fun.
I also like the way they do, I think the plot point is called The Bard's Lament, where Scanlan leads the party.
Ooh,
way better in the show. They really build it up to be a deep part of his character arc over a long span of time that I feel like ends up working very, very... I'll be excited to see what they do with it in the fourth season, which comes out like in a few months, I think.
They work fast.
Yeah, it was like supposed to be early next year. Yeah, they got season 5, fifth and final season, greenlit, which is awesome. Amazon spending the money on something good for once. But it is a small example of like a particular moment that plays out a certain way at the table, which wasn't wrong. It still worked. But they're like, what can we do to make this better? Okay, several things. Great, we'll do all of them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The amount to which they changed that moment, I saw... It kind of upsets some people, which, you know, makes sense because any adaptation that changes anything, you know, people who like the original are going to be like, why aren't you doing it like we already did it? But that specific thing was like, Scanlan has a pretty like hostile breakup with the rest of the party and then leaves, and then Sam brings in his new character and everyone bullies that character. Sam's really good at playing the heartstrings like a lute, but the way they did it in the show was a lot more like Scanlan kind of has to reckon with the fact that he has very intentionally lived his life as an absolute selfish bastard, truly just like f***ing around and never having to find out. And then as soon as he faces some consequences that he can't, you know, walk away from, and he starts looking at like, oh my god, like I have a daughter, I could live a better life, I could be like a father she can be proud of, I could do that, but it's so hard to do that and also adventure. That leads to something that isn't like a big blow up breakup. It's a lot more like, I can't be the best version of myself and also an adventurer right now. It's way more like self-care oriented. And you know, the team talked about like part of the reason they changed it is because they didn't know if they were getting season 4, and they didn't want the capstone on season 3 to be like a really messy breakup.
Yeah.
So it's a change that makes sense for a lot of reasons without really losing the heart of it, which is like, okay, Scanlan's out, who's coming next? Whew, yeah, no. Good show. I'm glad that we successfully built up to this as like the big thing. Because the other thing we could have built up to is very next year, D&D Honor Among Thieves came out. Oh boy, a movie has never gone badly for D&D at all, but actually this one rules. Now, you have not seen this movie.
I have not seen this movie. I've seen clips.
Yes, I showed you that one bit of Zenk fighting that guy, which really feels like all you need to know.
Which was quite cool.
Yeah, I've also seen that rescored with any number of ABBA songs, just in case you were wondering. But yeah, no, this movie is, in a similar way to Vox Machina, just the perfect encapsulation of what it kind of feels like to be playing D&D. I've seen people go through this movie with a fine-tooth comb and point out things like the initiative ordering is consistent in fights. Characters take their turns very quickly. Rounds do last 6 seconds. That's kind of interesting. You can definitely spot when someone hits a nat 1. You can definitely spot when someone hits a nat 20 with a potato as an improvised weapon, and it inexplicably does way more damage than it's supposed to. There's a whole chase sequence where the tiefling is like doing a solo stealth infiltration infiltration mission, and it gets foiled by the fact that the big bad has true sight. And then basically we get a oneer of this character wild shaping way more times than she's supposed to be doing, but it could easily just be spells she's casting all being reflavored into wild shape forms by the DM, because D&D is an improvisational flexible format, and if the DM is cool with it, then they're cool with it. And it's really cool. And wow, I just said cool way too many times. You can tell I've been thinking about this for too long.
Yeah.
It's the thing that this movie captures that I have not really seen a lot of other D&D stories try to capture is that specific moment of like, oh no, not even the DM was expecting you to fuck that up. Because then everyone's sort of like, well, shit. I mean, I don't know how you're supposed to make progress now. I didn't expect you to beef it that badly. And this movie loves that moment. They do it so many times. I think I sent you the clip where the sorcerer, the sorcerer fucks up and makes the entire bridge collapse.
I didn't realize that's where the bridge started.
Yeah. The next thing that happens basically is that they discover that the barbarian, like her husband's walking stick that she just pocketed the last time they visited him, he's like, oh my god, this is actually a magic item that lets you make portals between two surfaces, exactly like a portal gun from the hit Valve game Portal. And then they use that to get over the bridge being fully gone because they didn't have any. And like, I've seen people be like, that is the most DM saving throw moment I've ever seen of like, wait, sorcerer guy, you notice in her pack something you hadn't noticed before, but your magical senses are telling you exactly what this is. And then of course, the next time they have a challenge, they're like, let's use the portal staff to heist our way in this thing using like a painting with one portal on it. And then we can like steal the item we need out of the moving carriage. And then it's great fun. Very silly, and it does successfully manage to capture a lot of the feel of D&D from the inside perspective of the characters, up to and including the DM's extremely overleveled, really cool DM PC who talks like a Lord of the Rings character, shows up to get them out of one scrape, and then walks in a perfectly straight line out of the movie so they have to actually struggle for the final battle. Zenk is the best character. Also, proved to the world that paladins don't have to be annoying, uptight assholes, which is always good. Anyway, I would give this movie more time, but you haven't seen it.
It seemed fun. From the clips that I saw, it seemed really fun.
It's a great popcorn movie. It's a good movie on its own, but it's also great to watch with friends, and those aren't always the same thing.
I am on Team Chris Pine is best Chris, which I know is sometimes a controversial take, but he's my favorite of the Hollywood Chris's.
He's a good Chris in this one. They have a whole little conversation where they're like, okay, so everyone else is like a cool badass, but as a bard, what do you bring to the party? And he's like, well, I make plans, and then like, if the plan goes wrong, I make a different plan, and they're like, so you make plans that fail? And he's like, no, I mean, look, despite being a spellcasting class, he does not cast a single spell in the entire movie. He just hits people with his loot.
It's very funny.
Has a pretty compelling tragic backstory. This is another movie where like you get the highs of the comedy, but you also get the lows of like the serious, impactful character moments, which is good because I love any story that can hit both of those extremes. Yeah, that brings us basically as close to the present as we can get, so we can actually start sort of doing a top-down recap, doing some larger scale analysis of like what makes a good D&D based story. And I do think the answer lies somewhere in the middle of this Venn diagram between the high fantasy epic story my DM wants to tell, the juicy character arc I would love to play out at the table, and the way it actually feels to play a silly game with my friends. Because I do feel like all three of these ingredients are important, because, you know, any one of these circles is fine on its own in a lot of ways, but it's that specific overlap that gets the D&D feeling that I think is so interesting to capture. Because of course, if you do only high fantasy, you can have a very cool environment, but if you don't give the characters all that much to do, they won't be all that interesting. And having read a lot of these books with the exact same human or half-elf fighter as the main guy, I can confirm they do get very repetitive after a while. I don't care how dead his girlfriend is, he's not that interesting. And if there's no goofiness to cut the drama, you don't really get that specific D&D whackness that is so common at the table. Like, nobody can actually maintain a level of severity all the way through a D&D game, no matter how hard they try. Eventually the dice will humble you. So like, how do you handle the wackiness when the wackiness is inflicted upon you in a story that's all high fantasy or just has no wacky antics? You don't ever get the answer to that question.
Because even if it doesn't happen in the world of the game, it happens at the table between, like, friends being funny about stuff. Mm-hmm. Even if they still play it straight in their characters, that table wackiness is always there.
Exactly. The table wackiness is inescapable, and that's so much of what makes it D&D-esque. So, like, it can't just be, you know, Bathos undercutting all the serious moments, but the wackiness does have to happen. Like, that's what makes the characters feel a lot more alive, even in an otherwise, like, very serious story. Like, all the way back when we were doing, like, the Forgotten Realms novels, like, yeah, those books take themselves extremely seriously, but they will also have, like, hey, DM, can I blow out the candle? Or also, like, I think the very last scene of that book is the dwarf guy being like, Drizzt, my friend, I'm dying. Do you promise to fulfill my quest line and find the Mithril Hall for me? And Drizzt is like, of course, my friend, anything. And then the dwarf's like, great, I've got witnesses. Let's go find the Mithril Hall. I'm not dying at all. I just wanted you to participate in my side quest. And Drizzt is like, you bastard. And then just gives him a big old hug. And I was like, that is a hijink. That's awesome. I was not expecting that in this book.
Yeah.
You always gotta throw in the hijinks, because otherwise it's just a bunch of, like, stiff action figures getting bopped around a pre-made, track. But also, with only hijinks, you don't get the serious, weighty storylines or the really impactful character dramas. If you don't have the juicy character arcs, it's hard to get invested in the world. If you don't have the high fantasy, you lose the whole, like, fun of setting it in a world with dungeons and dragons in it. And if you don't have the silly game, it's not D&D.
Yeah.
Now, the primary thing that I think is interesting is that when you plan a story from front to back, especially a D&D-like story, a high fantasy story, you get something completely solid. The fertile soil from which Lord of the Rings grew. A fantasy story planned front to back that worked really well for what it was. But in order for something to be a game, and you brought this up earlier, there needs to be a genuine possibility of failure. There has to be the chance that your players will not succeed in all the steps to get from point A to point B. And a GM who plans a fantasy story has to reckon with the fact that the players, even if they aren't deliberately trying to derail anything, might still not be able to reach the end point of the story.
Or at least they'll have to work through other complicated secondary alternatives
Yeah, but
that have more consequences for the player.
Sure, but even then, like, it takes work for a DM to turn a failure state into a failing forward state. It is always possible that the team will roll badly and get a TPK unless the DM tries really hard to not let that happen. In, I think, episode 3 of the new campaign of Critical Role, the first real combat, the players rolled so badly for so long that everyone was like, you can see Brennan hauling on the ropes to try and, like, bail these guys out of a fight they are not supposed to die in. The weird thing is, like, failure in a game is different from failure in a story, because failure is very common in the stories. It is expected that the protagonists will mess up or fail to measure up in ways that encourage their character development, or they let the bad guys get worse in a way that makes the final confrontation more exciting. But a planned failure or, like, a scripted cutscene loss is part of the story. It's accounted for. It's like how things are quote-unquote supposed to go. But a fuck up in a game is a derail of that story, and it can do a lot of damage if it happens and becomes canon, and then arcs are left unresolved by it. It's like Tears of the Kingdom starts and, like, you and Zelda fall down a hole and that is supposed to happen. But then if you die at any other point in the game, that doesn't happen and you get reset back to the last time you saved. Death in a cutscene versus death outside of a cutscene are two entirely different animals.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you're playing a game, the full-blown fuck-ups can lead to some of the funniest, most memorable moments. Like when you're at the table with friends and you cannot collectively roll above a 5, you're gonna be talking about that shit for weeks. It's really funny. Sometimes all one can do is laugh. So the moments where the game does threaten to go careening completely off the rails can be the most fun to participate in, but that is also the moment when the story itself is in its most precarious state. The improvisational nature of D&D as a medium means that trying to steer the story towards a specific endpoint will almost always lead to a lot of chaos and potentially disappointment.
Yeah. Can I actually give a great example?
Yes, please.
From rolling with difficulty when I was a guest on the show as Hans Jaeger Jr. My whole character arc that I had, like, softly pre-planned with Austin is like, okay, here's what my character is doing for the party in the story. Here's the little mini arc that we're going to try to put my character on. We'll see how I do it. I have, like, a whole moment of self-actualization where it's like, oh, I'm not Junior anymore. Like, I can do this, and I bust out this huge spell, and I roll like dog shit, and I don't do it. And Indigo got the final kill instead of me. I showed up with my big, cool ability and did not win with it.
No.
And that's just D&D.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the reveal that you were, like, 5 levels higher than the rest of us was very funny.
And it would have been more funny if I actually did something with it.
That's true. But I do think that it's kind of fun that you can't just, like, one big moment of self-actualization your way out of being the saddest, wettest dish rag of an Aasimar I've ever seen. But yeah, no, I mean, that's a really good example. Like,
Truly a Hans-coded moment. And then it loops back around on itself. So it's like what you lose, I guess that's the benefit of D&D, is like what you lose in, oh, this would have been really cool in story if Hans actually did the thing correctly. The bellows shift, like one lever goes down here and it like pneumatically pushes up. Oh my god, that's so fucking funny at table instead.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Like, whenever I build a D&D character these days, I try not to build them with an end point in mind. I give them a lot of plot hooks, and then I just kind of turn them loose in the world. In fact, in the first season of the third campaign, which we finished up a month or two ago, I built this character. I rolled so good on her stats, and she's like a dragon sorcerer, which are incredibly broken in 5th edition. So she's just really, really overpowered. And she's like, her whole thing is that like she was the heaviest hitter in her old party. And I was like, oh man, it's gonna be so great, like the first time she actually gets knocked down and has to like rely on the rest of her party. 6 episodes later, that has not yet happened. I don't think Austin's gotten me below half. I'm too strong. The first episode I was in, he put me through a gauntlet of 3 combats, and by the end of that, I was down to my last legs. But since I joined the party, it's kind of just been like, well, I'm doing fine. I don't know about the rest of you. And I was like obviously knocking her down is gonna be one way to humble her, but there are other ways to pose problems to her that she cannot solve on her own. And Austin ended up throwing a completely different one at me, and I was like, this is better. This is better than the way I had seen this playing out, because it's so easy to take a character like that and give her a big Vegeta moment where she just gets her ass beat super hard and she's like, oh, impossible. This worthless person is managing to kick my ass. But that instead, like, giving her a problem that she fully does not have anything in her toolbox that she can solve is like, no, that's far more interesting. So anyway, yeah, like that's truly part of the beauty of improvisational storytelling. Like you come in with your plan and then your plan stops working, so you make a different plan.
Oh, so you're bad at making plans.
Yeah, no. So like, okay, I also play the lute pretty good. But like the end result of that is that like you make a story that is different than the story every individual person at the party would have told. But the story you get at the end can be far more interesting because of that. Like I mentioned earlier, like a GM who overplays their campaign and relies too heavily on their NPCs and doesn't really let the players in to participate or change things are often told that they should really just sit down and write a book because that's clearly what they want to do. Like they have the story already in mind, they just want to see it play out. And for the players, it's not all that fun to see a story play out in front of you where you don't get to participate.
Yeah.
Especially if they signed up to play a game. This was sort of my little like light bulb moment where I was like, oh, that's why I like this story format so much. I like the challenge of pulling a story out of a fundamentally sort of like actively hostile to the process of planning a story medium that D&D is. Like anyone who comes in with a plan is going to get humbled, whether they're the DM or the player. Like even if a DM is fudging rolls, they will still end up running into new stuff they were not expecting just because the players will throw stuff at them they weren't planning for. I was like, why do I care about this so much? Why have I sat down and read so many goddamn issues of 1988 DC Comics D&D stuff? Why am I doing this? Why do I keep going back and reading Drizzt novels? Why do I care so much about this thing? I like fantasy so much as a genre, but why do I keep going back specifically to D&D? A game that is not automatically a particularly fun experience all of the time. I have a great time playing with the tables I'm playing with, but D&D on its own, it takes a lot of work to make it that fun. And it took me a while to find a way to have this much fun with it. So why do I care so much about this specific overlap of D&D and storytelling, a thing that it feels like 3 other people on Earth care about? It sort of hit me when I was writing this out, was like, there's something genuinely so fascinating about being able to see the clockwork behind the story of the writer having to wrestle with the fact that nothing is going exactly the way they originally envisioned it. Because it's so clear to see that when you are doing something like D&D. But the trick is that also applies to almost every other form of writing ever. I have never, ever heard a writer be like, yeah, I planned the whole thing out in one go, and then I polished that up, and it was the final version, and it worked great. It's far more common to hear a writer being like, I had this idea, and then I was halfway through writing it, and I had a fucking way better idea, and then I had to rework everything to make it work like that, because it was just too good to leave. In a very real way, stories that are adapted from games of D&D are not that different from like any other long-form serialized story format with a decently sized writer's room. You know, you've got roughly the same number of participants weighing in on like, I think this character should do this. Well, I think that we should explore this maybe, or throw this at them. Old choices that were made on the fly come back to haunt. Decisions that seemed great in the moment start turning into huge problems later. Hey, wait a minute, is that a plot hole? We gotta spackle that over real quick. You know, that kind of thing. A character goes in a new direction, and then we have to decide if this is actually a direction worth pursuing or if it's a dead end. And then when you like adapt a story openly from an improvisational format with the expectation of unpredictable failures at every turn, suddenly you can see that like, oh, the fact that I need to correct for fuck-ups is a feature and not a bug. This is not a uniquely D&D element of storytelling. It's just so much more obvious when you can actually see the person rolling badly and being like, okay, how do we get out of this? And I think it's so interesting because like when you look at writing, I think from the outside, you don't see how messy and improvisational it looks because on a certain level, it feels like it shouldn't be. Like, it's like, yeah, you sit down, you plan it out, you write it out, you have the whole thing diagrammed from minute one. And it's like, yeah, but the trick is I rewrite that diagram every 3 days when I have better ideas.
Yeah. There is in D&D, I think, especially at the table, a very strong sense of causality, whereas a lot of stories suffer from, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens.
True,
and
yeah.
The author is basically just kind of like shoehorning movement and making it go forward, even if characters' motivations might not make very much sense, or the mechanics of why this thing is happening is finicky, or okay, I feel like the characters weren't really putting their ass into accomplishing this task or overcoming this obstacle. It just kind of feels like everyone's coasting through. That is not a problem with a lot of media, but like a thing that can happen. The benefit of D&D is that there is such a strong line of causality through every single thing that happens. As mentioned with, you know, the jump between Critical Role and Vox Machina, sometimes the order of those things can be a little bit wonky. But like whatever is happening at the table is happening because a character is reacting to it, the DM is putting it down, or the dice said so. It's one of those three things.
Yeah, basically.
And all of those have a strong sense of inherent movement to them, which is, I think, what gives stories based on D&D and table play at D&D a sense of not realism, because realism obviously has a set of kind of assumptions baked in, but a sense of believability. Investment's not really the right word. You can get it a little more. Yeah. I'm searching for a word that I don't have, and it would help me make my point if I had it. What was it?
Investment?
No. But it's stupid. No, but there's like the sense that everything that's happening in D&D is reacting to something. It's a system bouncing around. It's a rubber ball in a small room, and that feeling is compelling. It's fun. It's dynamic. It feels much more active than some stories can be if they're just kind of plodding along through stuff is boring and it's happening. D&D can be boring and stuff can just kind of be happening sometimes, don't get me wrong, but like when it works, that sensation of activity where there's that tripartite balance between the players, the game master, and the dice. It's very dynamic. There's a lot going on in that. Yeah. And either corner of that triangle can put a lot of weight down and move the other two edges in interesting directions. And as a system, mechanical and then also improvisational, that is what is compelling about D&D. And I struggle to get into that because I struggle to roleplay. I struggle with the systems. I find the dice frustrating because I too often get stuck on, I couldn't do the thing that I wanted to do. Yeah. Okay, well, I just go sit in the box until it's my turn again. And I know that's not the point, but that's what I feel like. And that's why it's like D&D just doesn't really work for me, and that's okay. But like when it works, I can see why it is compelling and why it is fun when it works.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, as a system, I will say D&D does make it unnecessarily easy to essentially lose a turn. I once spent an entire combat, 6 rounds, failing a constitution save to break out of a paralysis condition. I did nothing all fight. And then at the end, I got so mad I went off to try and single-handedly fight an Elder Brain, and then I got stopped, which was the correct call. I spent the intervening week between those two things being like, I'm going to get everybody killed, I'm so stupid. And then Sophia was like, I'm going to send you into the astral plane if that's okay. I was like, yes, please, save me. Like, character doesn't want that to happen. Player definitely wants that to happen. But like, there are other game systems that make it a lot more difficult to lose a turn or make sure that you are always sort of moving forward. We've been doing a home game playing Draw Steel. I think the final rules just came out. It was a Kickstarted project. And pretty much every turn, there is no miss condition. There is only doing the least amount of damage that your move has like possible. You always have your mobility. You always have these things. Even if you're downed, you can still take actions or move. You just take damage for doing it. So it's a trade-off, which means rather than being told like, no, you're in the penalty box, you don't get to participate, it's like you can participate at a price, which is more fun because it gives the player more agency. And like, I think that's the thing that you were talking about in all of this, is that like player agency is kind of a term that gets thrown around in a lot of different contexts, including video game, but like the ability to participate in the world you're in and see the consequences of your actions, good or bad, that's pretty huge. And that is a thing that tabletop games are uniquely good at, because the DM can just like use their big smart brain and be like, here's what I think the consequences of that are going to be, or like roll to see if they're like way better or way worse. Whereas, you know, with a video game, on some level, it's limited by what it was programmed to do. The effect to which you can reshape the world you're in is limited by the boundaries of the game. TTRPG is only really limited by your collective imagination.
Yeah.
And like you said, the causality, the cause and effect, the like, I did this and this happened, or like, this is the consequence of that action, or even like, my actions are the consequence of my backstory, which was the consequence of these actions. Like, rather than a sort of like random scenario of like, oh, this fucked up thing is happening now and you all have to deal with it. That does happen, you know, there's a thing called a random encounter for a reason. Sometimes rocks fall and everyone takes damage. But the general idea of like, you do things and in consequence other things happen, that is something that TTRPGs are uniquely good at. And when you pull that out and turn it into a written story, you get a situation where the characters are reactive to their surroundings, but also their surroundings are reactive to their actions. You know, the things that they do tangibly affect the world around them and vice versa. It's interesting because like, I'm glad you put that into words, because I think a lot of that in my head was just sort of unspoken like D&D courtesy. It's kind of rude if your players put all this work into like saving an innocent town, and then the next time you come through, it's been burned to the ground by bandits and everyone's dead. And it's like, I hope you had fun putting all that work into that, idiot. See how quickly I can rip this away. Like, that's considered bad form. Like, unless you warned the players, like, hey, it's pretty dangerous. Like, you know, you might want to go back and check in on those guys. Like, no warning, no courtesy call. You just killed a bunch of NPCs someone was invested in for no reason. That's pretty rude. And, you know, there are contexts in which that works. Like, let's be real. If you leave your starting village unattended, everybody gonna die. Like, I'm sorry, you are asking for a tragic bad. If you're like, yeah, both my parents are alive and healthy, the DM is already cracking their knuckles. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But like, you know, such is the way of the game. But yeah, part of why I like this specific like story format so much is because it leads to the question like, how do you recover from failure and how do you change your plans when the plans are not going correctly? And this is one of those things where you can really see the clockwork and how that decision making gets made.
Yeah.
I'm
the
glad
stakes. It feels like there actually are some.
Yeah. But also as a writer, I think a lot of people see a really polished final story and they're like, wow, you must have had this entire idea fully formed from the forehead of Zeus. And then when the actual answer is like, no, I stumbled through that shit with a machete, you know, bushwhacking my way to the finish line.
Yeah.
It can be kind of hard to see how that could have ever happened. Like, Tolkien in his notes would be like, yeah, I was telling The Hobbit to my kid as a bedtime story and he was pointing out plot holes. And it was like, oh, damn the boy. I did say that the doors were this shape and not this shape, which is very funny. But like, you know, without something like that, it's like, how could a story this good ever get made except by some sort of like divine inspiration? And then you see something like this and it's like, oh no, a good story can come out of something that was absolutely kind of a shambles behind the scenes.
Yep.
And that's why I think these are so neat. And that's all I got, buddy. I was delighted to find that this 3 kobolds in a trench coat art is official. So,
oh, amazing.
Yeah, that's about all I had about this specific subject matter. I think we covered a ton of ground here.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I got to put all this knowledge to use, because for like months I was just running around with like, I probably know more about Record of Lodoss War than most people alive right now, and I don't know.
I was going to say, I heard a lot of stuff about Lodoss War in the last few months.
Yeah. I was trying to find a better outlet, and one did not exist before I made this slideshow.
That's what half of these are for, is I have a thought I need to get out of my head.
Yeah,
and it's too messy to put in a trope talk.
Yeah, I gotta defrag. I think that these stories are so interesting to examine from that specific. I mean, like, the fact that we had so much to say about Vox Machina, when like I've only seen some of Campaign 1 and you've seen very little of Campaign 1, if anything.
I've seen like the funny clips.
Right, yeah. I obviously got into it from a Best of Grog Strongjaw compilation, like everyone else.
Sure. I think I've seen more like animatics than I've actually seen real table moment clips, because the table is so slow. There's 16 seconds of dead air in between each clause of a sentence.
Yeah,
and I get it, they're thinking, I get it, but the viewing experience.
I mean, listen, a live stream is a punishing format to do, especially for like 115 4-hour episodes. No, I mean, part of a D&D podcast. I've been part of multiple, but I don't tend to listen through them, and it is truly because my attention span usually does not participate. So all of these, like, adapting the D&D game into another form of media, they're great for me, because then I get to see what happened in the D&D game, but I also don't need to budget out 400 hours for it first, which is, which is awesome. When Vox Machina came out, I was like, it is me. I am target audience for this. I am the person who really wanted to see this the whole time. No, you should definitely watch Honor Among Thieves. It is a lot of fun. With a lot of these, it's more fun if you know the mechanics enough to be like, oh, that's Zenk using the Divine Sense Paladin ability that says evil smells bad. Or like, oh, they're fighting on basalt columns because they're hexagonal. Whoa.
I did notice the hex tiles. I noticed that.
Yeah, very charming. But also it's like, whoa, green flame blade. That's crazy. Or like, whoa, that lady's casting Finger of Death. Holy shit. Which is always, fun. But I think also, like, the hallmark of a good adaptation of this type is that it also works if you don't have any of that context and you're just kind of going into it blind. Like, how well does it work if you're just like, I want to see a fun fantasy story and I don't care about all this nerd stuff? I'm here for elves and dragons. I don't care about dice.
I can never get into Critical Role the normal way, but goddamn Vox Machina is so good.
It's so good. I'm so excited to see more. I've been intrigued by Campaign 4. Not enough for my attention span to cooperate, but I have read through the transcripts of a couple episodes, and they look real interesting. But then again, Brennan Lee Mulligan's specific DMing style does work a lot better for me than some others I've seen. It's not on the list, but like Dimension 20 has far more hits than misses for me.
Sure.
So if you already have a Dropout subscription or know someone who does, you should definitely go and watch a lot of those. There's a whole other conversation to be had, because the way that Brennan DMs, it's not scripted and it's not on rails, but there are definitely, like, he will put in cutscenes that our heroes are supposed to lose in, and then sometimes they don't, and then he has to rewrite the rest of the season to deal with it. Which is always fun when it happens, because it is kind of an admission of, like, he's not gonna cheat or, like, fudge the dice rolls to get the outcome he needs. But he was kind of banking on everybody losing that fight, and he doesn't entirely know what to do when they win and they take out his BBEG like 6 episodes early.
Yeah.
That's a whole different detailed diatribe that I don't have anywhere near enough slides for anyway. But yeah, I think that actually truly about covers it. Thanks for indulging me on this one. I know D&D is usually not your bag, but I'm glad that that strong opinions were formed nonetheless.
I've tried on many occasions to get into D&D, even including writing my own system and DMing a game in my own setting, which I really thought would do it, and it did not.
Yeah.
We were playing a game with same friends that you watched Vox Machina with. We'd been playing some games together, and I was enjoying it well enough, but I didn't really have a character that I felt compelled by. It was like, okay, mechanically this is okay. I still like miss all my shots all the time. I feel like the character's kind of boring. So, okay, maybe what if I DM'd a game and I can do this, and this, and I made my own system where it's like basically every attack either you do the amount of damage that you want to do, and the health points are like drastically simplified. And instead of missing, if you fuck up, like you take a hit instead. So there's always something happens, which in my like video game design brain feels better than nothing happening. A bad outcome is more satisfying to play than no outcome, because that's just frustrating. And I was like, this is great, I love this. And then I ran a session and I'm like, I'm bored. No, can't do it. I actually still don't care at all. I can't get into it. I can't get into it.
Yeah, I will say that by voicing this opinion on the internet, you have invited the legions of people who will recommend ways to fix that. I'm not saying any of them are going to be healthy. I'm just saying it's going to happen. So
yeah, to which I say I don't care. I prefer board games. I prefer video games.
Yep.
It is my medium. D&D is not, and that's fine.
That's fine, man.
Fine.
Takes all
Nothing will
kinds.
capture the high of playing it on the bus for 45 minutes every day to and from school. The critical factor being there was literally nothing else I could be doing with that time.
The yawning abyss of boredom really is the wellspring from which all creativity flows, isn't it?
Ain't that the way?
Yeah, ain't that just the way?
I'm glad so many people enjoy D&D, and I like the media that I get out of it afterwards.
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, like, like I said, it's fun for me to play. It's very fun for me to see the stories that come out of it. There's something extremely charming about them. And I think I've identified a good chunk of why I like it, but not all of it. There's definitely still a certain je ne sais quoi that just keeps me coming back for more and rereading the AD&D comics and wondering how the hell they homebrewed a playable centaur character. I think that is all I got. And
Yep.
I have been yelling so many days this week. I definitely made choices recording this. But yeah, I think that's everything. So, bye!